Welcome to Horror Story Chronicles, your dose of spooky stories. Let's get into the plot. On a cold, autumn night in the small town of Everwood, two friends, James and Mark, found themselves in a dimly lit, quaint restaurant. As they savored their dinner, their conversation took a macabre turn, shifting towards eerie tales of their school days. The atmosphere inside the restaurant seemed to darken as James leaned closer to Mark and began to recount a story that would haunt his friend's nightmares. It was the autumn of 2023 when I started attending Everwood High, James began, updating the setting to a more contemporary time. I quickly befriended a Scottish lad named Angus. Our school was large, and teachers came and went like shadows. One term, a new instructor named Professor Ashton joined our ranks. He taught us Latin and was known for his chilling stories of far-off lands. Professor Ashton had a fascination with an old gold coin he carried, a relic from his travels in Turkey. Mark listened intently, the flickering candlelight casting eerie shadows on his face. "Go on," he urged. Professor Ashton's classes were unlike any other, James continued, his voice dropping to a hushed tone. He encouraged us to craft our own sentences in Latin, igniting our imagination. One day, he set us the task of constructing sentences using the word, remember. While most of us composed sentences conventionally, Angus struggled. Just as Professor Ashton was about to reach him, Angus hastily scribbled something down. When Angus finally left the classroom, he looked perplexed. Mark's curiosity was piqued. What did Angus write? James continued. Angus explained that he couldn't think of anything until the last moment when the words, memento pute inter quatuor taxos came to him. He believed it meant, remember the well among the four trees. When Professor Ashton read it, he fell silent, his expression growing darker by the moment. He began to question Angus about his family and background before finally letting him go. James paused for a moment, letting the tension in the air thicken. Angus fell ill with a cold soon after, missing school for a week. A month passed without incident until one ominous day when we were tasked with writing Latin sentences on pieces of paper. As Professor Ashton reviewed them, he stumbled upon a piece that left him pale and terrified. He abruptly left the classroom, leaving us bewildered. Mark leaned forward, his eyes wide. What was on that piece of paper? James's voice grew colder. The paper was written in red ink, a violation of our school rules. It bore the haunting phrase, Si tu non veneris ad me, ego veniam ad te, if you don't come to me, I will come to you. None of us claimed it as our own, and the count of papers exceeded the number of students in the class. But the most chilling part was that when I checked the paper later that day, it had turned completely white, with no trace of the red ink. The room felt suffocating as James continued. Stranger still, Professor Ashton returned to school that day, his face a mask of dread. But the true horror unfolded one midnight. Angus woke me up, terror etched across his face. He was convinced that a malevolent presence was trying to enter Professor Ashton's room. We watched in silence, the darkness outside holding an unexplainable dread. Mark whispered, "What did Angus see?" James replied, Angus described a tall, emaciated figure signaling to Professor Ashton. It appeared more like a specter than a living being. By morning, Professor Ashton had vanished without a trace. The restaurant felt colder as James concluded his tale. Angus and I kept our terrifying secret to ourselves, but something about it haunted us. We never saw or heard of Professor Ashton again. Mark, now thoroughly unnerved, drained his wineglass. That's a chilling story, James. I hope I don't encounter any spectral figures on my way home. With an uneasy laugh, two friends bid each other farewell and departed. But little did they know, the sinister events of their shared past were far from over. Nearly a year later, as Mark, the avid listener, visited Ireland to see another friend, he had no idea that he was about to plunge into a nightmare beyond imagination. A nightmare that would reveal the sinister secrets buried beneath the roots of those four trees and the malevolent force that sought to bridge the gap between the living and the dead. His friend James was never seen after their last meeting at the restaurant a year earlier. Thank you for being their friends. Subscribe for more such spine-chilling stories.